Yeah, I said that I would start just by explaining a little bit about Alarm. And Alarm basically is a membership organisation that supports people who are professionals in the risk management industry, the risk management profession. By and large, our members hail from public sector and not-for-profit organisations. And also, and we're there to represent the industry and to represent the profession. And by and large, our members are drawn from large local councils, police forces, fire brigades, as well as some of the larger charities as well. And we are increasingly finding that we're working within the charity and third sector, partly, I think, because there is a move for more of the services and that traditionally were run by local authorities to be run nowadays by charity and third sector organisations. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of background to that. Just a background to myself. For many years, I was the Director of Risk Control for a large risk management consultancy. And in that role, I helped many organisations, both in the commercial sector, but also very many in the not-for-profit sector and charity sector, to develop and implement systems of risk management. And now I sit on the board of Alarm. Okay, back to you, Tom.
Thanks, Colette. We're delighted to welcome Colette to this Community first in a series of Ask the Expert webinars, and this morning we're going to be getting together to discuss effective risk management in a charity setting. So we're going to cover the subject matter on screen. This is really relevant to our space at the moment. We know only too well there's a lot of high profile failings in the charity sector, and there are some simple tips that we could all adopt that could help us both survive and thrive with an effective risk management culture. So thanks, Colette. So with this in mind, I think it would be profitable to start with our first question. So is that okay, Colette?
Yes, certainly. Go ahead.
So what would be the key pieces of advice you'd give to any charity setting out to implement good risk management processes?
Okay. Well, I mean, I think there's a few pearls of wisdom that I'd probably impart to anyone that asked me that question. And I think probably the most important thing I would say is keep it simple. A small or even a medium-sized charity doesn't really need to have an overly complex system or process in place to manage risk. Sometimes I think we do overcomplicate these matters. Risk management really is nothing new. When you think about it, any good manager has always been managing risk. And to me, the way risk management should operate within any organisation is that it should be more about a style of thought and more about the culture than it is about having loads of paperwork. If you're already talking in a formal way about your risks and you're communicating about your risks, to me, I think you're probably more than halfway there to what you need to have in place. Now, in terms of keeping it simple, I actually quite like the model that's set out by the Charity Commission, because again, I see this as a fairly easy to understand step-by-step approach that people can take. And this slide really just communicates that. So basically, the first step is that you need a risk policy. And all that is just committing the charity to the principles of risk management. And simply stated, I think that should say that your charity is committed to understanding the risks to which it's exposed, that you're committed to owning those risks, that you're committed to taking action, appropriate action, depending on what risk exposure you have, and that you're ready to learn from your risk taking. And it needs to be no more complicated than that. And you can set down your roles and responsibilities. So you have a risk policy. The next thing is you have to identify your risk. And again, I would point you back to the Charity Commission's guidance, which has a very good comprehensive list of the types of risk exposure to which any charities may find itself exposed. I'd also point you to the training courses that we're running with Charity First, with Community First, because these help you to, I think, understand what some of these risk exposures are. So you identify your risk. Once you've identified it, a simple process of assessment, which is very simply asking yourself, if this happens, how big a deal is it for us? And how likely is it to happen anyway? That should help you answer question 4, which is what action should we be taking about this to control this risk? And I think, again, a very important principle here is that you should be willing and able to take on board some risk. This isn't about removing all risk. If we didn't take any risk, we'd never get anywhere. It's about saying, how much risk can we take? Are we prepared to take? Do we want to take? And then putting in place some simple controls. And then once your controls are in place, you obviously have to monitor them to make sure that they are actually working the way you intend them to work. And also that the risks themselves remain unchanged, or there isn't something new that's creeping over the horizon. So, and all of this, I think, is set against the background of governance and communication. So you have to give some thought to how the governance of the charity works, whether people understand their roles and responsibility, are willing to take those on board, and vitally, that this isn't just done by somebody sitting back in a room by themselves. It means nothing if none of this is being communicated. So a simple process, and I think that would probably be the first pearl of wisdom, is keep it simple, and this is quite a good model to look at. I think the second thing I would say, though, is don't be fooled in thinking that just because it's simple that everybody will get it and do it. Quite often people say to me, well, surely risk management is just common sense. And actually, in a way, they're right, it is. But you'd be surprised how often people don't apply common sense. And we have plenty of examples of organisations who have failed to manage risk, and senior management teams and boards of trustees who appear to have been completely blind or even ignorant to the risks that they face and that their charities face. And as a result, they've lacked resilience to deal with events as they arise. So although, yes, implement something that's simple, do implement something, because there has to be some sort of formal framework to this, because believe it or not, people don't just get it. And I think the final thing I'd say, though, would be keep it positive. All too often, risk management is seen as some sort of barrier. Risk management gets an incredibly bad press. And people see it as a very negative thing, and it's all about stopping you doing stuff. And to me, that's completely wrong. To me, risk management's really an enabler. It's there to say, what do we want to do? What are our objectives? And how do we get there in the best possible way? How do we make sure that we achieve these objectives? So I think, again, a big message might be that you may be a small organisation, you may be a small charity, but you can still be professional about what you do, and you can still be well managed. And your risk management process will help you to achieve that. Hope that answers that one, Tom.
Many charities don't have a massive amount of resource and capacity to implement detailed management processes. So what would you say to them to convince them that they should devote scarce resource, time and money to risk management?
Okay, well, I mean, to be honest, I get asked this one a lot. I've often been challenged by senior management teams and rolled into boardrooms, sometimes being given only 5 or 10 minutes to convince them, to win them over to the benefits of a risk management approach. And as a result of that, I've developed what I call my elevator pitch, which boils down to the 5 main outcomes I see that you should expect to get from good risk management. So what I believe it should be delivering for your organisation is, first of all, what I call the gift of foresight. A problem we have with risk management sometimes is that we use hindsight a little bit too much. We look at things that have gone wrong with other organisations and say, oh, well, they should have done this, they should have done that. Now, that's all too easy because, you know, we're using hindsight. But to me, risk management's really about planning. It's really about looking forward and trying to identify what the pitfalls are that might stop you achieving your objectives. And by doing that, you will have fewer surprises. Forewarned is forearmed is a common saying. And I think even if you don't do something about the risk, you're less likely to be a rabbit caught in the headlights if you've given it some thought and you've put some basic planning into place. So that's the first benefit. The second one is it provides a framework for control. And what I mean by that is that it gives the organisation this framework and this ability to discuss risk in a formal way that aids communication. It gives you the vocabulary that you need to use to pass on the information and provides information maybe to the senior management team or to the board of trustees about what some of the key risks are and how well they're being managed at any point in time within any point in time. So again, that's a very organisationally based thing, but actually very important. That goes with number 3, because once you've got that framework for control in place, the next thing it does is it provides you with better informed decision making. It gives you the data, the information that you need to allocate scarce resources and to help make those decisions about where your priorities should lie. If I give you a very quick example of what this might look like in practice, if I show you this is a heat map risk assessment. This would be an output from a risk management process, a form of report that might go up to the board of trustees, which would indicate what the key risks are to the charity at any point in time. And you can quickly see that maybe risk number 7 that's rated or assessed to have a very low impact should it happen, but it's quite likely to happen, but it'll be low impact. It's not moving anywhere, it's pretty stable. We're not going to have to talk about that at every board meeting. However, risk number 1, which would have a high impact and is also highly likely to happen, and worse still, is heading in an upward trajectory, that should be top of our agenda to talk about at this board meeting. I'd also probably want to have a chat about risk number 9 and risk number 6. But you can see how this would work, that it's a way of focusing attention on those areas that require greatest attention at any point in time. And it's providing the framework around which you can have that conversation. So that's the better informed decision-making part of it. Improve stakeholder relationships. I mean, this is so important nowadays. And I mean, your stakeholders could be your sponsors, your donors, statutory bodies, the community you serve, staff, volunteers, and your beneficiaries. So you have a whole range of stakeholders. But basically, I think they all want to be able to see a well-managed organisation that knows what it's about, that understands its risks, and is able to show the steps it's taking to reduce threats, but also to increase opportunities. And your risk management process will help you to demonstrate and evidence that. That can be absolutely vital when you're bidding for funds and for contracts, as many charities are now finding that they have to do. And I think if you also think about the recent fallout from the Oxfam scandal, DFID announced just last week that it is now introducing new and enhanced safeguarding standards for all organisations that they work with. And importantly, they've said that they will not approve funds to them unless they can pass these new standards. Really, they're signalling that they want to see a robust process being put into place for the management of the safeguarding risks. And we'll probably see something similar to that across the whole sector. And then the last thing we've got down there, protection of assets. Again, what risk management will do is make you more resilient to those risks that can impact upon all of your key assets, be they your human assets of your staff and your volunteers, and also your beneficiaries. Physical assets may be that your charity owns or leases or uses, so your buildings and equipment. And very importantly, the asset of reputation. It helps to protect your reputation. So I think all in all, that's the reason why it is important to dedicate some scarce resource towards this. Hopefully that answers that question, Tom.
Thanks, Colette. Question 3 then. Some of our members have raised the issue that they've got a risk register, but that it has very little impact on the way that people operate on the coalface, operationally. That it's a case of bureaucracy gone mad. So isn't this just another excuse to back cover and keep regulators happy?
Again, it's not uncommon that people say to me that as well, that they have a risk register and they have some format, but actually it doesn't really seem to impact upon much. And I think really, to me, that's all about them not doing it right, not having the right purpose. And it can become just a compliance exercise if you don't pay attention to making sure that it becomes part of the culture. So again, what I would say is that it's not about satisfying the regulator, and it's not about eliminating all risks. And too many organisations spend a great deal of effort trying to manage all of the risk out of every situation, which is absolutely ridiculous. What it is about, it's about, as I say, applying this idea of foresight, about simply understanding the nature and scale of the risks that you face because of what you want to do, and then putting in place relevant levels of controls that will help to minimise the threats, but also to maximise the opportunities and thereby reach your goals. And as I've said before, keep it simple, but make sure that most of your effort goes into the communication side of this and maybe a little less effort into the writing it all down and having a risk register part of it. So hopefully that answers that one.
From your knowledge of the sector then, Colette, what do you think the key risks that trustees and management teams should be considering right now?
Right, okay, well, when I thought about this, I mean, this isn't scientific at all. This is just the world according to Colette Dark, actually. But these were the 4 that immediately sprang to mind. And I think probably because they're all very much current hot topics within the sector. So top of the list, obviously, I think is safeguarding. The scandals within Oxfam and a number of the other international development charities really has brought this very much to the forefront. But to me, I think it would be a mistake to think that it's only those charities that face this risk. Any charity that's providing services to vulnerable people, be they children or adults, should always have this risk high on their radar. And this should be one that should be up there and constantly monitored and looked at. So I'd say that almost is number 1 on my list at the moment. A close second, I'd say, is data protection and data management. And this is obviously being pushed at the moment because we've got only until, I think it's the 28th of May, before the new GDPR general data protection regulations come into effect. And this is obviously a very hot topic within the sector because many charities hold a great deal of personal data, and some of them will even hold some sensitive data about people, volunteers, but largely beneficiaries and donors and supporters as well. And so this coming to grips with how you manage your data is something that I think needs to be looked at. I'll state here, I'm actually not a GDPR expert, but I do think that this should be seen more as an opportunity to start to apply a risk management approach to the asset of data. A slightly different angle on that, I'd say, would be digital and data security, maybe better described as cyber risks. Again, this bubbles to the surface quite frequently, and is more to do maybe with service resilience. How resilient is your organisation to various types of attacks or meltdowns that it might suffer? So, I mean, for instance, in the news last year, there was a number of reports, in particular surrounding hospices who'd been targeted by cyber criminals. One in Scotland lost £500,000 in funds, and another lost £250,000 because of these cyber attacks. And it could be that charities are being targeted as soft targets. So, you know, a question for a board and a senior management team would be, well, how resilient are we to this type of attack? And everybody also runs the risk of what happens if, you know, our servers are damaged, meltdown, breakdown. If our access to the system goes down, how reliant are we on that data to provide our services? And what's our backup should that happen? So I think that should be there. And then the fourth risk that very much comes to mind as well is to do with income streams and the security and volatility of those streams. I think, as I've said before, I work in a variety of sectors, and to some extent all organisations have to face this one, you know, where's the money coming from? But to me, this risk is probably more uncertain and maybe more critical within the third sector. And I think the reason for that is that a lot of charities run on very low reserves. And so this can come to a fore very, very quickly. So a risk management approach would really require the trustees and senior management team to have a very good idea and to keep a constant watch on income streams and to be ready to cut their cloth accordingly. And you might well think, well, that's obvious, you know, all boards do this. If that's your response to that, I'd say go and read the Parliamentary Inquiry Report into the Collapse of Kids Company, and you'll soon see that not all boards do that in anything like enough of the rigorous approach that should be taken. So, I mean, I think those are some of the hot topics risks. In terms of what to do about these, again, I would just guide you back to the process because it's the same for all of them. You have to identify what that risk is in terms of your own charity's operation. So let's say we take safeguarding. You know, to what extent are you exposed to that risk? To what extent do you provide services to vulnerable adults and children? And how is that service provided? And what opportunities are there maybe for individuals to abuse their positions? You know, so that will help you to identify for you how likely is that risk, and if it does happen, how big an issue could it be? And given the response to your assessment, okay, well, what do we do about it? What are our controls? And there are a number of controls you can be looking at, including your recruitment process, how you check people's backgrounds, what training you give them, very importantly how they're supervised and how frequent those supervision checks take place, and how people are encouraged or able to raise any concerns that they may have through the normal channels, and if they're concerned about that, through whistleblowing channels as well. So, you know, are those processes in place? Are you doing as much as you possibly can do to take action? And then on the monitoring side, how do you know that those controls are working and are being properly implemented? So again, you know, and you know, the communication and governance piece is in there. Have you communicated this to all staff, to all volunteers? Do they know what they should be doing? So again, it's just applying that process. So hopefully that, you know, and that goes the same for data management, for digital resilience, and also for income volatility as well. Tom, I don't know how we're doing on time, but I'll pass back to you for more questions.
Thanks, Colette. I have a question, actually. You've alluded to, through the presentation, the fact that secured income is vital for voluntary organisations, as it is for all organisations. But there is an increasing trend within our space of competitive tenders for public sector contracts for the delivery of service, and increasingly particularly tight margins, which mean that organisations have to have very robust bid or no bid decision making processes.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, because in a way it sort of changes the landscape quite a bit. I mean, and I think the risk management process has to start with the first question is, should we bid for this contract? You know, does this align with our mission? Does this align with our objectives? And is it something that we want to do, we should be doing? And then the obvious next question is, do we have the resources to actually match what's being asked for from this contract? So there's two big strategic risk management questions to ask up front. The whole process, the whole procurement commissioning process itself raises a number of risks. And again, a risk management approach would require that you understand what those risks are and that you evaluate those risks and have a formal discussion about them, and then decide what control measures you can put in place. You know, and this might be, you know, sometimes these contracts come with clawback clauses in there, you know, so that funds might be provided, but if you fail to meet the contract conditions, they can be clawed back. You know, so again, it brings in a whole new area of contract risk that you might not have thought about before. There's a legacy issue. You know, these are contracts, all contracts come to an end. So what happens with the services you've built up once this contract maybe goes out to competitive tender again, and you might lose it next time round? So again, how will you manage that transition? So, you know, any number of those questions, I think, are worthy of, you know, a discussion and that approach. And, you know, people may sit there and say, well, that's just common sense. And I'd say, yes, it is, but you'd be amazed just how frequently people just bowl on and get involved in these things and never stop to properly consider what needs to be put in place for a contract that they bid for to be successful and to work. And if that's what they want to do and they decide they do want to go for something, then the risk management process will help them to identify what could go wrong and how they can manage that. And it can also provide them with a competitive advantage to show to the commissioning body that they're a well-run, well-managed organisation that understands the risks and has the right types of controls in place. So, I mean, I don't know if that helps, you know, how you apply this process to that area, but yeah, absolutely. You know, it's something that is very particular at the moment.
Thank you so much, Colette, for your time today, but I think we've arrived at the end of our session. One final quick question really is, where can people go to seek further advice?
Okay, yeah, because I mean, obviously this is just a quick, you know, run through of, you know, a couple of key points. And there's two places I would point people in the direction of. I mean, first, obviously, together with Community First, we've developed a one-day training workshop that has the purpose, the objective of providing people with a very practical introduction to risk management. And the way we've developed this is to ensure that they come away armed and ready to put this into practice within their charity. We've run this session before with Community First, and it's been very well received by the people attending. So we know that they feel that they're getting some valuable, very practical advice and guidance about how to do this, keeping it simple but making sure that they get a proper process in place. Another place which is a very good source of information is the Charity Commission guidance on the subject. It's the document number is CC26. It's freely downloadable from the Charity Commission website, and it does contain a wealth of advice and guidance about how to go about implementing this within your charity.
Colette, thank you.
You're welcome.